Hey everybody, welcome to the final part of the lecture that we didn't actually cover in class. This will be part 4 on the outline, social issues and labor movements, and I'll try to stick to the outline as much as possible and keep this quick and painless. Now, as I mentioned, I don't want you guys to get confused. This era of politics is called the third party system, and that refers to an era of politics where people identify with their parties really, really closely. It has nothing to do, that naming has nothing to do with what I'm getting ready to mention now, which is the rise of populism. So, populism or the populists, they are going to come out of the Western United States and the South. And if you can think about what those have in common, those are going to be agricultural regions. And they are going to have they're not going to like the industrialism of the Northeast. They feel sort of left behind. And a lot of their calls that the populists are going to make, they are the precursors to what we will talk about after your exam, the progressives. And they're going to form the People's Party in the 1890s. It kind of comes together, and it comes together through these farmers' coalition called the Grange. And it's really kind of farmers helping each other out and talking about the stuff that they need and want, etc. And this spills over into the West and into the South. And the things that they're going to advocate for are government ownership of railroads and telegraphs. They don't like they're having to pay high prices to use the railways or high prices to use the telegraph. They have to ship their produce, their product, and when these prices are getting really expensive, they're like, look, we're getting gouged, we're getting destroyed by these monopolies, and we don't have the opportunity. We're losing money on this, so we need the government to step in and either at least regulate this or preferably own these railways so that we can, ship our goods in a affordable manner. Same thing with telegraphs, which could be quite expensive. In addition, they're going to call for the unlimited coinage of silver. Now, we talked about that at the end of class a little bit. We talked about hard specie versus soft specie. They're going to want to bring silver on board so that there can be more money printed. And this is because farmers need loans. And quite frankly, in the 1870s, you could go to a bank and they'd be like, we can't loan you any money. We don't have any money. This doesn't have it. So they want that so they can get their farms up and going at the beginning of the season, pay off those loans at the end of the season. Now, it doesn't say this on here, but they are also going to advocate for secret ballots. So that workers can't be intimidated and things like that. They're going to want a graduated income tax. Now, we don't have an income tax yet. We won't have an income tax until the 20th century. And they're going to advocate for what we effectively have today, which is a graduated income tax, where you pay more based upon how much money you make. They also want the direct election of U.S. senators. Now, I want to explain this briefly. At the time, senators were elected by state legislatures. So if you wanted to become a senator, you just had to win over the people of the state legislature, not the people of the state. So this basically meant, like, today, if I wanted to become a senator in Oklahoma and we hadn't changed things, I would just have to go to Oklahoma City and win over a few hundred people, as opposed to having to win over a few 100,000 people. So they want the direct election of U.S. senators to put the power to the people. That's why they're called the People's Party. It's giving power to the people. They're also going to advocate for 8-hour work days. They're also going to advocate for referendum and recall, which means that you can, and we see this. A good example here in Oklahoma from a few years ago would be medical marijuana. The people, they go to an initiative. They get people to sign, a petition, an initiative. Then that goes on to a vote as a referendum. And the people of the state get to vote and make that law. It goes out of the hands of Congress, of the legislature. Recall is the same thing where you can sign petition and then you have a referendum to recall or a person that's been elected. And this happens every once in a while. It's happened a few times in California. It's how Arnold became the governor of California back in the 2000s. Ultimately, populism will fail because it is regional. It stays limited to the South and the West. It never really has that national power. But slowly, those populist ideas will become part of the progressive era and eventually be adopted by the Democratic Party once we get to the 20th century. Now, workers struggled in the United States. As I mentioned the other day, 12 to 15 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, very, very low wages, nothing to really speak of, dangerous new machinery, horrible safety regulations, no safety regulations. I mean, there was no, it was, you die using the machine, we can easily replace you. You lose an arm using the machine, we can easily replace you. Now you just don't have an arm. No health insurance, no pensions, no unemployment. None of the things that we associate with modern work was there. Those really won't come about until the 1930s. There will be some gradual changes in the early 20th century, but it takes quite a while for us to get to that point. Now, the thing that we usually point to, which is kind of out of the period, is the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire of 1911. And the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire is so indicative of all of these problems with how labor was treated. In particular, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company in New York, it was the workforce was predominantly young immigrant women, and you can actually go online and look at the bios of the women that died in this fire. And what happens is that these women go to this place and they work, and there is one little elevator that takes them to their floor, takes them to the floors where they're working, and it's designed to be little, so that not many women can get in it, so that management can check out and make sure that they're not stealing things. And then these women were not allowed bathroom breaks, the doors were blocked, and the doors were blocked in some cases by barrels of oil. And a fire breaks out at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company, and these women can't escape. They had this one little elevator. There are no such things as fire escapes, the stairs or any of those ladders outside of apartment buildings. That stuff will come about because of this. But when it's all said and done, 146 predominantly young immigrant women die in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And they die in this fire because they were locked in. So they either die of smoke inhalation or they die from jumping out the window trying to escape. Now, while this will lead to safety reforms and a growth of the union movement, there is also a complete lack of repercussions for the company. The company has no liability. They get away with this. Nothing is done to them. And it's indicative of how little regulation and how big business could basically get away with whatever it wanted to. Now, granted, this is a little bit outside the period that we're talking about, but this story could be copy and pasted to numerous different places over the course of the Gilded Age. Now, as for that labor movement, there will be a labor movement in the late 1800s, and it will have varying levels of success. Typically, now there had been guilds. I want to say there had been guilds like before this. Guilds had existed for a long time. But guilds or those rudimentary labor unions were like very, very niche. It might be like shoemakers or, cobblers is what you call a shoemaker, or haberdashers, hat makers, piano tuners, stuff like that, very, very niche. The first sort of broad union that we get is the Knights of Labor in 1869. And then in 1886, the sort of first big union that we're going to get, which will eventually become the AFL-CIO, is the AFL, the American Federation of Labor. And they kind of bring in unskilled workers, which is the first real movement toward that. That prior to this, labor unions were sort of reserved for people that had a particular skill. But now with the AFL in 1886, it is for people of all ilks of skill levels. And when we talk about these labor unions and their key moments, there are two key strikes: the Haymarket Square riot, aka the Haymarket Square massacre, as I typically dub it. And this happens in 1886, and this is a protest for an 8-hour workday. And the story behind this is convoluted. And basically, in the Haymarket Square massacre, workers are protesting for an 8-hour workday. And the police are there to stop them from protesting. This is dealing with the McCormick Harvester machine company. So, farm harvesters, they're building them. And all these workers are really going for is an 8-hour workday. There's all sorts of other horrible things. Businesses at this time might force workers to live in company housing. They might force workers to buy their goods from company stores. There's the long work hours, the unsafe conditions, etc. But this is simply about an 8-hour workday. And it turns violent. Now, the police are going to say that it is the union members, or these protesters, these people on strike, that are responsible for the violence. But a bomb is thrown and several people die, including police officers. Now, the police blame the workers. Now, I don't know about you. If I'm out protesting with my friends and my fellow workers, I'm probably not going to throw a bomb into my crowd of friends. Most historians will agree that there were some no good anarchists that wanted to see things just happen, and they threw the bomb and caused the deaths. Now, the problem with this is it leads to a view that the labor movement is radical and that the labor movement must be put down. And we see that manifest itself in the Pullman Palace Car Strike of 1894. At the Pullman Palace Car Company, now a Pullman Palace car is a train car. It's one of a railway car. And the Pullman Company decides that they are going to cut wages. Well, we can get plenty of employees, but they decide to keep rents high. Again, we're talking about a company that is forcing their employees. This would be like if you went to work for Walmart and they said, oh yeah, but you also have to live in the Walmart apartments. So they cut the wages, but they don't cut the rent. And so there's a strike. And a man by the name of Eugene Debs, who would become a very important leader early on in the FL, leads the railway workers in this strike. And the railway strike starts to spread. Well, the federal government at the time, Grover Cleveland, says, well, here's the problem, guys. Those Pullman Palace cars that you're building, we use to deliver the mail. And now you're stopping the mail from being delivered, which is a federal crime. And so the government sends in federal troops to put down the Pullman Palace car strike. This is an example of how the federal government is in cahoots with big business. They are using troops to put down a labor movement. This is very indicative of this period of the Gilded Age. So to conclude of this lecture, just remember the conclusion here, if you look at the list: economic growth versus inequity. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. Political corruption and reform. favors system, bribery, things like that. You have the growth of the workers' movement. You start to see unionization. You see the government and big business push back. And then last but not least, the populists come along, which will eventually influence the progressives. Well, that was a good end of 15 minutes to this lecture. We will have another lecture next Monday about imperialism. And if you have any questions about your exam, that would be a good time to ask them this next Monday. Peace.